All I want is for Comey to be honest, and I hope he will be, and I'm sure he will be, I hope.
The firing and the fallout, the president creates a firestorm by firing James Comey. Two of South Florida's top prosecutors are here to weigh in.
Pleading for protection, Haitians in South Florida make the case to renew their legal status to stay.
The people who are sick, the people who are dying, the people who are waiting.
Medical marijuana in limbo. The calls grow louder for a special session on medical marijuana and doing what voters demanded.
Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. We begin today with threats, lies, and possibly tapes, and escalating events since President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey.
It was the most tumultuous week yet in the Trump presidency. Just when you thought it couldn't get any crazier or stranger, it certainly did. The president had growing concerns over James Comey as the FBI director, and it all came to a head on Tuesday when he fired Comey in a most unceremonious way. Little dignity was afforded to the man who had run the agency under President Obama and had tenure to run it under President Trump. The most troubling question was the timing. While Comey was leading an investigation into Russian interference in last year's election, some say it may have bordered on obstruction of justice.
Two of South Florida's former U.S. attorneys are here to weigh in. Roberto Martinez, now a partner at Colson Hicks Eidson, was U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida from 1992 to 93, appointed by George H.W. Bush. And Kendall Coffey, a partner at Coffey Burlington and U.S. attorney here from 93 to 96 under President Bill Clinton. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming in this morning.
We are so glad that you two distinguished attorneys, former U.S. attorneys, are here. Bob Martinez, tell us when you heard the news on Tuesday that Comey had been fired and the reasons that were given. What did you think?
Glenn and Michael, thank you for having us on your program. I was suspicious of the motive and I questioned the timing. I did not approve Comey's public disclosures last year during the investigation of Secretary Clinton, and I thought there was reason enough for Obama to fire him last year.
You thought he had usurped power by going ahead and saying Hillary Clinton would not be prosecuted.
He violated a whole number of policies and practices and precedent of the Department of Justice. I think if President Trump wanted to fire him, there was a time to do it right after the inauguration. So when I heard the news this week, I was immediately suspicious of the motive, and I questioned the timing.
I was surprised, like the rest of the country. Like Bob, I thought that Comey had certainly acted in some ways that were unprecedented and irregular, both with the July press conference, declining a prosecution that he had no right to decline as the FBI director, and then later the so-called October surprise. I had a sense that it was going to sooner or later get him into a real clash with President Trump. I didn't expect it at the time, but after getting over the surprise, my thoughts turned to what's next, because we've got very serious investigation going on. We don't want it disrupted. We want it moved forward. What's next?
Isn't that, I mean, obviously the president can hire or fire whomever he would like to do and had every right to fire Comey for any reason or no reason at all. But Roberto, the timing, to your point, the timing and the context really is what makes this an issue. That's why we're even talking about this, is it not?
Right. So you use the president's own words. Right? In a job interview of the FBI director to determine whether to keep him or fire him, he asked him, "Do you have me under investigation?" Now tell me if that isn't intimidation. Okay. So, and then later on, when he explains the reason for the firing, he said that he wasn't relying on the recommendation to fire him, that he had made his own decision, that he wanted that investigation to stop. He said it was nonsense. Well, these are his own words.
And James Comey, through associates, told the New York Times that some of the conversation, which happened 1 week after the president was sworn in, first of all, it was to, allegedly, to get Comey to swear loyalty to the president. And Kendall, when you and Bob both took your oath of office to be U.S. attorney, you swore allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. You didn't, even though you were appointed by Bill Clinton, you didn't say, "I raise my hand and I support Bill Clinton."
No, you leave all politics behind when you go into the Department of Justice.
But we've seen unfold over the past week. First, the White House press staff came out, and then the vice president came out, and then the president himself did a network television interview that the country watched. And in those 3 interviews, all coming from the White House, 3 or maybe more different reasons for the firing came out. And to me, as just a casual observer, what's so troubling is this changing story. Again, the president had every right to do it, but the story keeps changing. And the credibility factor, what does it do to the credibility factor of the White House if the reasons for the firing keep changing?
Well, and I think even now, we don't really know what the reasons are. We'll continue to read about in the memorandum prepared by the Deputy Attorney General. He cited the fact that in the meetings before Congress, in the testimony, Comey said that whatever mistakes he may have made before, he would have done the same thing over again. And if that's true, then that might have been a legitimate basis to take a closer look at him.
But you said he wasn't doing a good job. The president
but
had
there have been multiple explanations. And we all know the more explanations you have, the less convincing they become.
Yeah, but Bob Martinez, the explanation that really raised eyebrows, I know, including yours, was the interview with NBC's Lester Holt on Thursday.
Correct.
Where he said, well before I got the recommendation from Rod Rosenstein or from Jeff Sessions, I had decided to fire him because I was thinking this Russia thing, and it got me upset, and so I just fired. I did it.
Correct. So let's disregard everything else and just focus on the president's own words. So the president's own words, changing story, but the last version he gave to Lester Holt was that he had already decided to fire Comey. He didn't like the investigation. He wanted it stopped. If he did that, and by the way, if there was a pending grand jury investigation, if that was part of the component, then there's a potential here for an obstruction of justice, because you need to have a pending legal proceeding under the federal obstruction of justice statute. Now, I'm not saying that he's guilty of it, but there certainly is more than probable cause to believe that an offense has been committed.
Okay, so from a prosecutorial point of view, you hear the president say that. What evidence would you need to say this is not a reason, this is obstruction of justice?
Well,
how do you go from A to Z there?
I think you have, look, when you're dealing with a federal criminal investigation and you're making accusations about criminal wrongdoing, you have to be very careful, whether you're talking about Secretary Clinton or President Trump. Okay, so you'd have to make a very thorough investigation. You need to talk to a lot of people. You need to interview him, President Trump. You need to interview the FBI director, Comey. You need to interview people in the White House. You need to interview people in the FBI. You need to do a lot of things before you actually reach the conclusion of charging anybody. But is there definitely probable cause to believe that a federal offense was committed? If there was a grand jury investigation as a component of the investigation, then that's a pending legal proceeding, and that could give rise to an obstruction of justice.
All right, well, obstruction of justice, as we know, anybody who has followed politics, was at the heart of both the impeachment of Bill Clinton and Richard Nixon 43 years ago. Here is, I want to put up on the screen what a very well-respected law professor at Duke University Law School, a former prosecutor, had to say this week in the Washington Post. He said about obstruction of justice, it's all about the purpose with which it's done. In theory, trying to intimidate, silence, or even influence someone who is investigating you could be obstruction of justice. Kendall, you don't disagree with that, do you?
The definition is correct, and one of the linchpins to exploring it further would be Comey himself. Would he say under oath that he believed that President Trump was trying to intimidate him, James Comey, into shutting down the investigation? If he did, that would be a serious thing.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, we know that Mr. Comey was invited to appear before a Senate committee on Tuesday in private. He said, no, I don't want to appear in private. But apparently, Bob, he has said, I will appear in public. And if he appears under oath, he certainly is going to be asked about this.
Yes, he is.
And should be.
And should be. That's correct. He should be.
Well, to your point, the intimidation factor, is that something that the president would not say to any staff member? Here as president is what I'd like to see. I mean, when does that become intimidation in a legal sense?
Well, obstruction is a very subjective crime. It's one of the more poorly defined things, but it ultimately becomes a matter of intent. And if anybody who's aware of a pending grand jury investigation goes to anybody who might be a witness, for example, and attempts to intimidate them, Could be to shut down the investigation, could be to seal their lips, could be to destroy documents. Those kind of intimidations, if provable, can of course lead to obstruction of justice.
So would not be what Comey perceived, but what the president intended?
It would be a requirement of both, but the starting point is if Comey said, I heard the president, I wasn't intimidated, I didn't think he was telling me to shut down the investigation, then that would shut down the issue of obstruction of justice.
All right, gentlemen, hold your thoughts for a minute. When we come back, we want to talk about whether a special prosecutor is needed, as some believe. So stay with us. We'll be back with Kendall Coffey and Roberto Martinez in just a minute.
We are back with former U.S. attorneys Roberto Martinez and Kendall Coffey talking about the "you're fired" moment this week with the president. And I know you both are not on Twitter, but I know that you heard about at least the president's Twitter blitzkrieg on Friday morning, among which was a tweet that said that everyone is now talking about, James Comey better hope there are no tapes of our conversation. Roberto Martinez, that is, well, there's no doubt there's a threat there somewhere. Whether it rises to a legal threat, I don't know. But what does that even mean, do you think?
Well, when I heard that, my first reaction is that is surrealistic. In the famous words of Yogi Berra, deja vu all over again. Now, I don't know whether there are tapes. As we know, unfortunately, from President Trump, he says a lot of stuff that isn't real, and then he goes and changes his story. So who the heck knows whether there are any tapes?
But what if there are tapes? When I read that Friday morning, I thought, well, wouldn't the president be the one to be nervous if there are tapes? That was my initial, fair or not, I don't know, but that was my initial reaction. Tapes of, can you even have a tape recording without two-party consent in Washington, D.C.?
I'm sure the president has the authority to authorize it, but tapes ought to make everyone nervous. I thought it was something that probably was a bluff, but who knows?
I think the question, let's look forward a little bit, is what happens next, and something that a lot of Democrats in Congress and some other people in the legal establishment think should happen is a special prosecutor. Now, Bob, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, would he not be the person to say, yes, I'm going to appoint a special prosecutor? But as you explained to me in an email earlier this week, there are special conditions that apply before that happens.
There are regulations within the Department of Justice that allow for the appointment of a special counsel.
Special counsel.
Now, the Attorney General has recused himself from this investigation, so now it's in the hands of the Deputy Attorney General. The question under the regulations is there a conflict of interest so that nobody in the department can undertake that investigation? Or are there extraordinary circumstances? I'm not a fan of the special counsel. I think we've seen how it has been abused in the past against Democrats or Republicans. I think it is a last resort. But the question that we need to ask is, can the department at some component level investigate it without a conflict? Or have we reached the level of extraordinary circumstances? If the Deputy Attorney General does not take steps to reassure the public that he is independent enough and has the integrity to stand up to President Trump, and if he doesn't assure the public that the Department of Justice is going to dedicate the resources necessary to do the investigation, then I think we would be at the level and at the stage where special counsel should be appointed.
That's Rod Rosenstein.
That is correct.
And so he is also the central figure. Did he write this memo criticizing Comey of his own accord? Was he instructed to write the memo in the first place that the president then used as his cover for making the firing happen? And now reports that Rosenstein is so angry about that he's threatening to resign. How can he possibly be in a position to take on that decision?
Well, I think he can be, as was just explained. We need a demonstration that they can maintain the current leadership and go forward with it. To get a special counsel, and there's going to be disruptive. You're starting all over again. This is an investigation people want to see moving forward. And in all events, the FBI is going to investigate it. They're not going to hire another agency to come in and do the real work of an investigation in terms of witnesses and documents and things like that. But here's what I think has to be considered. Rosenstein served 8 years as the U.S. Attorney in Maryland under President Obama. He's got an impeccable record. And yeah, we've all gotten a little bit of bad weather lately, but he is an outstanding and highly respected prosecutor with And the other U.S. attorney that is leading the investigation appears to be the Eastern District of Virginia, also an Obama appointee. So at this point, I think if we can step back and look at the attorneys, the prosecutors who are in charge in the driver's seat on this one, I think we can have some confidence in them. But on the other hand, it's got to be demonstrated going forward that there is not a conflict of interest, that this is an investigation we can trust.
Glenna, if I may follow up on that.
Sure.
I agree with Kendall, 100%. There are a lot of great people in the Department of Justice and in the FBI. The Deputy Attorney General knows that he was used by President Trump. He knows that. Okay. The public knows that he knows that. Right? So he is now diminished in the eyes of the public. He must do something quick this week, whether it's in his presence.
He's going to appear before Congress on Tuesday, I believe, in a closed-door hearing. He can say something after he comes out, perhaps?
There has to be something very significant coming from him to us, the members of the public, to assure us that he has the backbone, the independence, and the integrity to do this investigation honestly.
As U.S. attorneys for the Southern District of Florida, you both work closely with the FBI. It's a great agency. It has a huge bureau here. I guess nearly 500 agents work in South Florida. And I think the question for them, the question for the country, is who is going to lead the bureau now? And I heard Jeffrey Toobin, Kendall, on CNN the day of the firing say he's afraid the president's going to appoint a stooge to come in to quash the Russia investigation. Do you have that fear?
I don't have that fear. I think not just Democrats in the Senate, Republicans in the Senate are watching this very, very closely. I think there's a lot of concern, and I'm confident that for anybody to get confirmation, they're going to have to be, if not a James Comey, who frankly had fabulous, unimpeachable bipartisan support, right, but a high-quality independent person or
right,
plenty of law enforcement experience.
And without trying to impugn them, it's not going to be Chris Christie or Rudy Giuliani or somebody very close to the president politically.
I'd be astonished if that would be acceptable.
You're shaking your head.
No, let me tell you something. The FBI, the agents in the FBI, have a tremendous amount of pride. They know that they are the place where the public looks to for integrity and independence. You don't mess around with the FBI. If the president thinks he can mess around with the FBI and the FBI will leave that alone, boy, is he mistaken.
That's going to be the final word. Bob Martinez, Kendall Coffey, great to have you guys come in.
Thanks for having us.
Really appreciate it.
Up next, live to Caracas, our correspondent there on the ground where conditions are deteriorating and violence is escalating. Stay tuned.
And now to the ongoing crisis in Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro has still not agreed to call new elections there despite weeks of demonstrations and many deaths. 40 anti-government protesters have died.
And Thursday night, the nephew of international fashion designer Carolina Herrera was found murdered in what they believe was an apparent kidnap for ransom. And that may well be another sign of the spiraling crisis, the social and economic collapse there. Our colleague stationed right there in Caracas, reporter Cody Weddle, is with us today. Cody, good morning. Bring us what is going on the ground right there.
Good morning to you guys. Well, we are officially in our second month here of these ongoing protests and demonstrations, and the opposition continued with its plans this week. They called 4 protests last week. We once again saw significant crowds at those protests. They're also trying to diversify their attempts at these demonstrations. One demonstration included the participation of the grandparents, the older folks here in Caracas. They also at one demonstration to encourage people to make their own shields, symbolically protecting the Constitution, but literally protecting against projectiles and tear gas. So these protests continue, and there's no sign that they will let up in the coming week as well.
Hey, Michael Putney here. There is a disturbing report in today's New York Times and Miami Herald that many or some of these protesters are being taken to military tribunals rather than civil proceedings. Explain to us what's going on there.
That's right. A significant number of these protesters are being tried in military tribunals, and the government response, the government's answer to that is that they are committing acts of terrorism. That's how they are trying to try them in military tribunals. This could be rooted in the fact that the Attorney General here, Luisa Ortega, has been dissenting from the government recently. So the government may fear leaving these protesters in her hands for fear that she may release them or be lenient on them. But a significant number, hundreds of protesters being tried in those military tribunals.
You know, Cody, what is going on in Caracas is very much a local story here in South Florida. And right now underway, there are a lot of people donating supplies, medical supplies, goggles for tear gas goggles for people there on the streets of Venezuela. If you know, have you seen that this is making its way to the people there? Are these humanitarian donations, are they getting where they're intended? Have you seen that?
It appears that at least some of those materials are getting here. You know, I spoke to a paramedic group, a group of young medical students who go out to these protests and they assist protesters and also National Guard and police, and they say that many of those materials are sent in from abroad. The problem is that the government doesn't want these materials to get here, so in many cases they have to be sent in personal luggage. In other words, people who are coming here have to pack this stuff in their personal luggage to get it here, because they're afraid that if it is shipped, it will be discovered and confiscated by the government.
Wow.
Cody Weddle, we really appreciate the update today and your reporting from Venezuela every day of the week on Local 10 News. Thank you very much.
And up next,
thank you guys.
Up next, we take it all to the roundtable. Stay with us.
As you obviously know, this has been an overwhelming week of news out of Washington. We want to try to make some sense of it this morning with some of the best and brightest in South Florida.
And that means it is time for the Powerhouse Roundtable, and we have a good one for you today. Sergio Bustos is senior editor for Politico Florida? Politico Florida. Politico Florida. He has also covered state politics for the Associated Press and Miami Herald. Mark Caputo is also a correspondent for Politico and writes the daily Politico Florida playbook, Double Trouble from Politico Today. And Melba Pearson is deputy director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Florida, and she is an attorney who previously was with the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. Some real brain power here today.
Boy, I guess we do. All right, Mark Caputo, tell us. I know you spent the last couple of weeks in Tallahassee, but you've been watching what goes in Washington. So just give us your impression when you heard that Comey was out and the way he was out. What did you think?
It's tough to top Saturday Night Live these days. Or better said, it's tough to Saturday Night Live to come up with any more material. You know, what I don't think I could add anything that hasn't already been said. But one thing that hasn't been said is this is such a perfect Washington thing. I'm not saying this is not important, but Congress seems designed just to have hearings and talkings and not doings. I mean, while they're all up there doing all this stuff, they're not passing any legislation, really making anything better.
Right.
Well, did they before anyway?
No, they didn't. I think Gallagher, that old comedian from the 80s, talked about how con is the opposite of pro and Congress is therefore the opposite of progress. So we're seeing it.
Yeah, Sergio, I mean, I think Mark's point is a good one. All the talk about tax reform and reforming, making better the American Health Care Act over in the Senate. I mean, none of that happened this week, and it's going to be a while before it does.
No, I think Mark's right. The problem you have is that you have just so many distractions. And if, in fact, they appoint a special prosecutor, which I think is a long shot, it's still, you've got the two intelligence committees, you've got the FBI, and then you've got this soap opera drama built in. Will Comey show up to testify? He was supposed to Tuesday, he's not. Right. But that means the next time around, so it's just a constant drama that again distracts from everything else.
Melba, excuse me, Glenna, but Melba, and it's all advanced almost daily, every morning, by the tweets from the president.
It's like when you roll over in the morning, you're afraid to look at your phone because you don't know what drama.
That's the first thing I do.
It's like, oh no, what is it going to be today? I mean, we just need to have a special prosecutor, give the American people the transparency they need. And I'm just so frustrated. I want to see folks pick the Republic over politics. Pick the republic. This is our country.
Or at least in James Comey's case, like, he didn't even get a rose in the ceremony, right? He got fired
it was
instead.
the "you're fired."
Later on at the end,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make light of it.
I'm going to do a little commentary where I'm going to make the point, I'll make it again right here, is that whether you agreed with him or not, he was a person of dignity and worth and stature and integrity, and I think he deserved to have the president look him in the eye and say, "You are fired," not to send a bodyguard to, take a awkward letter over there.
And find out by seeing it on television when you're at a meeting. I mean, how degrading.
Yeah, even Apprentice-like show would have been better.
You brought up tweets. We have a very engaged audience here who loves the roundtable. People are tweeting about this right now. We have a couple of tweets from viewers that just came in to the Twisif, hashtag Twisif. We can put them up for you right now. Michael R. calls this a circus, which is...
Is he talking about us or Washington?
I think the context is the Comey firing. So, yeah. And then Dragonheart says, if the President of the United States doesn't have confidence in Comey, neither do I. And we had talked about the President can fire Comey for any reason or no reason at all, but the optics, it's the Washington word, the optics of it at this time with this going on and the Russia investigation about to take a, kind of blossom, Mark, it's
an FBI.
It's just the timing is bad.
Right. Well, timing's everything. An FBI director has a 10-year term for a reason.
Right.
If you are going to change, usually it would have been better to change right at the beginning. The timing looks awful. I think to Melba's point, the special prosecutor would probably be a good idea, even for Republicans who don't want to deal with it.
Exactly.
Because then they could say, oh, it's a special prosecutor. But let's face what's really going on here with Republicans. If Trump goes down, he's the leader of their party. They go down too. So politically, they are disincentivized from appointing a special prosecutor, especially if they fear something is going to happen. And more broadly, even if they don't fear something's going to happen, but they fear more news happening, they don't want their entire political platform and the ground under them to crumble and disappear.
Right. If I can, I don't mean to surprise our director, Alex, but there is a quote from Michael Gerson, who I happen to admire. He's a former George W. Bush speechwriter, and he wrote a column this week. Thank you very much, sir. Here's what Gerson had to say. Trump's firing of Comey was legal. It also violated a democratic norm. A proper presidential deference for an ongoing investigation and the independence of law enforcement. There is no indication that such considerations ever even occurred to Trump. Tough stuff, but Sergio, I think that Gerson's right.
Yeah, I mean, even if you believe what President Trump said, he says that James Comey invited himself to the White House to save his job. And then Trump turned around at this dinner and said, you want to keep this job, essentially.
Pledge your loyalty.
Pledge your loyalty. Or even if you believe the other aspect of him saying, well, if you want to keep the job, let me ask you this, am I under investigation? I mean, those are really suspect things to say at I suppose, a dinner where you're having with the FBI director.
Well, the whole story is kind of crazy anyway. I mean, I'm going to invite myself over to the White House like the president came downstairs and was taking the milk
exactly out of the fridge. Slams it shut. Hey, can I keep my job?
Or was it,
So, Lawrence Tribe at Harvard was not the first to raise the word impeachment. I mean, you have possible obstruction of justice.
Absolutely.
You have possible intimidation. Is that, it sounds almost partisan to even say that. Miss Resident Legal Diva, which is her Twitter handle.
That's my Twitter handle, yes. But the thing that's just so disturbing is that these things keep happening and more things keep coming to light. And, we have this ongoing investigation that it appears that the president is trying to derail. So that's why it's just so critical. We need a special prosecutor just to put all this to rest, even if nothing has happened. It's possible. Right? But at least lay it to rest in a fair and impartial way. You can't demand loyalty of a person. You have to have loyalty to the republic, loyalty to the country above all else.
All right. At that point, a good segue here. Let's move on to a very important, I think one of the most important local stories in a while is the possible extension of temporary protected status for 58,000 Haitians. Now, there was a big rally yesterday in Miami on Northwest 7th Avenue outside the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And Mark, I thought it was significant this week that Governor Scott finally, I asked a couple of weeks ago, are you going to support TPS extension? And he really didn't say, but now he did tell Secretary Kelly at DHS, yeah, please extend it.
Well, it's always good when Governor Scott finally answers the question. Sometimes it takes a little while, but in this case, I must admit I'm not terribly well informed about the TPS process. We were talking about this kind of backstage or in the green room, so to speak. On one hand, it does make sense to check and make sure that immigrants are not committing crimes when they're in the country, but on the other hand, in order to get TPS, you're supposed to be crime-free anyway, so it's kind of self-enforcing and regulating. So it does bring up the questions like, what are they looking for?
Well, as far as I understand, the only criterion for TPS is that the country to where these people are being taken back is a livable, safe place.
Correct. Correct.
And so there is, Sergio, you were nodded, there is documentation from December from Citizenship Services with people on the ground there documenting why Haiti is not.
Yeah, this is another example where I think Trump is going in the direction that his supporters want, but he then takes this other path and he's going after Haitians, which they suffered the 2010 earthquake, and then there was a horrific storm just last fall, when he might be better off going after the other groups in TPS, being Salvadorans, Hondurans, because that TPS is a humanitarian gesture that dates back to Hurricane Mitch, which is from the 1990s.
Oh, there's
so
a
you
case
might
to
be
be made that
that's a better argument.
Well, and those are dangerous places too,
Right.
for different reasons.
And this is just another case of racial profiling by this administration. I mean, he starts off with, all Muslims are terrorists, so let's ban all Muslims, when it's only a couple Muslims who perform terrorist acts. So now you're looking at Haitians and saying, well, let's ban all Haitians, let's send them all back because of the acts of one or two. And only 7% of the inmates in state and federal prison are non-citizens. So it's clear that immigrants are not the ones committing crimes in this country. So again, it's the false narrative and it's the racial profiling that this administration is becoming known for, and it's very tragic.
Well, the president's going to have to make a decision soon, because July 22nd is when this TPS period expires, and I think that it's just in a couple of weeks or a week or so where the notice has to be given about what he is going to do.
And they would have to be, if heaven forbid he goes forward with this course of action, they would have to leave by January.
And
You're sending 50,000 people back to a place that has cholera. Folks are still living in tent cities, and they would be deported back to a place. They could end up in jail. It's horrible.
The president of Haiti is saying we cannot absorb them. Well, everybody, stick to your places, hold your thoughts. We'll be back with more of the Roundtable after a break. We are rocking along with our roundtable on this Sunday morning, live in our studio. Sergio Bustos,
Mark Caputo.
Mark Caputo, excuse me.
Melba, Michael, Melba.
Excuse me, and Melba Pearson. Melba, good to see you.
Good
All
to
right,
see you.
so Mark, I know both you and Sergio have been up there in Tallahassee for the last final moments, the swan song of the legislature, but they never got to medical marijuana. They tried, but they didn't figure it out. So are they going to go back?
Well, that's a good question. The House Speaker, Richard Corcoran, wants to go back and have a special session. The Senate President is almost there, and Governor Rick Scott is not answering the question about whether to have a special session. I think overall, let's just remember this. A good number of the Republican-led legislature, a good amount of it, is against medical marijuana anyway, and they're against regulations.
Yeah, but the people of Florida said we want medical marijuana.
These are people who hate regulations.
71%.
They hate regulations, they hate medical marijuana, and then you're going to put them in charge of writing regulations. They screwed it up.
All right, so now, legally, we have a constitutional amendment. We have the video that we're showing right now is one of the dispensaries, the licensed dispensaries in Miami, who are operating kind of on a constitutional amendment without statutory backup. So what can they do? I mean, is it a free-for-all?
Well, right now it's somewhat of a free-for-all because you need the legislature to give that guidance to the Department of Health as to how to follow everything that was voted for, what the people voted for.
Oh, okay, but the question is, in the absence of that, you have legal dispensaries dispensing, and TruLeave, this one with the piece we had done this week, is that they're now selling of their own accord bud form, which it comes in a little inhalable cartridge, but nothing's to say that people can buy it and take it home and undo the cartridge and use it however they want to. So how do these legal dispensaries operate legally in the absence of written rules?
And therein lies the issue. I mean, that's the Department of Health that regulates that activity. But without guidance from the legislature, they're just kind of winging it. And the people who end up getting affected are the 2 million Floridians who need medical marijuana because they have cancer, because they have, MS or some very, tough diseases to deal with.
I think they call them debilitating.
Debilitating, correct, yes.
I think what's difficult too is if for the voter who voted for this, right, who said, okay, let's have this, to think that you can't smoke marijuana is one thing that the House and Senate agree you can't do. That's got to be confounding to anyone that's known anything about marijuana. Now the other thing is supposedly this is a Republican-led legislature, and they're trying to dictate who can sell and who can dispense the marijuana. Again, that runs contrary to the Republican mantra of free market.
Free markets.
And yet they can't figure this out.
Well,
and now it's going to be left to the Florida.
One of the houses that you probably know better than I. One of the houses, I think it's the Senate, wants to restrict to just a handful. But I think is it the House that said, listen, let the free market decide. Have 100 dispensaries.
But it's a minority position. There is wanting heavy regulation. In fact, one of the lawmakers said, we are creating a cartel, much like the oil countries.
Yeah, just really briefly, there are 7 existing licenses under the previous and existing very weak medical marijuana statute for low THC marijuana. Both chambers agreed to add 10 more licenses. The issue was on numbers of dispensaries. The Senate essentially wanted to cap the number of dispensaries per licensee because they didn't want to give the existing players too much of a start and therefore start a monopoly. The House said, hey, just let it open, see what happens. You got Winn-Dixie, you got Publix, you got Sedano's, and who else do you have in the grocery store market? Well, there's a grocery store in every corner, let them deal with it.
Before we run out of time, I do want to have you all remark on the fact that the governor's race for 2018 really seriously got underway this week. Adam Putnam, the State Agriculture Secretary, former member of Congress, announced his candidacy. Gwen Graham also announced as a Democrat. She is one of several over there, but maybe the leader. But Sergio, Adam Putnam is just the odds-on favorite to be the GOP nominee.
Yeah, and so was McCollum back in 2010.
Right.
And then this guy, Rick Scott, came along. Now, there is no Rick Scott in the bushes, if you will, but there is...
like Sean Spicer.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry.
But you do have the House Speaker, Richard Corcoran, who could
But he said he's going to wait until after next year's legislative session is over before he... But, the train may have left the station by then.
At least money-wise, yeah.
Well, watch Mark's eyebrows and you have something to say.
Well, money matters. Yeah, the problem with Richard Corcoran is not independently wealthy. Remember, Rick Scott decided to run in April of 2010, and he wound up beating McCollum, longtime incumbent,
right.
and then Alex Sink to become governor.
Right. Yeah. And Gwen Graham, I know you probably watched some of the coverage of her announcement. I mean, she's very, very solid, former member of Congress from up in the Leon County area, a Democrat who beat a Republican to win that one term in Congress.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And also I saw that Andrew Gillum is running as well, and African-American, mayor of Tallahassee. So I think it's going to be very interesting on the Democratic side as well. I mean, all we can do is watch and wait and see what happens.
Andrew Gillum has been out front, first to announce.
Yes, he was.
Out front, trying to... How does his, what looks to be early on a very strong candidacy at this stage, how does that happen? What happens to that when a Graham gets in the race? And aside from the candidate, the name is just so well known statewide.
Right. Well, the bottom line is he's going to have to put the work in. I mean, if he's, hitting it from pillar to post, from the top of the state to the bottom, talking to people, knocking on doors, shaking hands, kissing babies, all of those things that you need to do to engage the people and let them know your name and what you're about. And he has a good reputation in Tallahassee, so we'll see.
He's been, we are told he's been a good mayor. Mark, John Morgan, the kind of legendary personal injury lawyer up there in Orlando. Charlie Crist once worked for him. He has indicated that he may run. I've got to say, I know him slightly, and he is a riot and smart, and it would be kind of fun if he got into the race. What do you think he's going to do?
Well, I don't know. I think he'll wait to see if Gwen Graham and if Andrew Gillum and whoever else, Chris King is an Orlando businessman, fall apart. If they do, then I think John Morgan will be more enticed to enter the race. He is the father of the medical marijuana amendment, and the more the legislature screws that up, the more it inspires him to want to run.
I was going to say, in our headlines today, we had a little clip of sound of a video he put out statewide. He is on video, he's using social media. Does that mean he's pushing medical marijuana or floating his name for candidacy statewide?
Could be doing both.
Yeah, combination
Anyway,
of both.
thank you all for coming in. Great roundtable. We really appreciate it. Still to come, my personal perspective about the way that James Comey was fired.
Take a look right now from our Mount Sinai Medical Center tower cam.
And here is Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa, who is celebrating her first Mother's Day, and she has her forecast.
Thank you, Glenna and Michael, and happy Mother's Day to you, Glenna.
Thank you.
It is very warm out there, 86 degrees right now in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, so basically the mid and upper 80s. We still have time to heat up into a 90-degree mark, which is very warm for this time of year. We're also dealing with a west wind anywhere between 5 to up to 15 miles per hour. That is continuing to bring us some rain from west to east. And speaking of rain, we're seeing it near Key Biscayne and over the Kendall area. Also out west, more showers are developing, and these are pushing towards the east. So it's not going to be over, but as you can see, it's not everywhere. It is not widespread. So spotty to scattered showers and thunderstorms continue as that very weak cold front pushes through the area for the rest of today. Also muggy conditions, very humid out there. So keep yourself cool, drink that water. This afternoon, we're going to hit a high of 90 degrees. Can't rule out a thunderstorm. If you still want to head out to the beach, you can sneak it in before those storms roll in.
Jennifer, thanks. All right, before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about the firing of James Comey. Now, look, the president had every right to fire Comey, but the timing is suspicious. Firing the guy who is heading the investigation into your presidential campaign, that doesn't pass the smell test. And the way the president fired Comey also raises serious questions. Like him or not, Comey is a serious, dedicated public servant. He deserved at least a thank you before he got kicked out. And do you know how that happened? He learned about it on TV while he was in the FBI's LA office. He thought it was a prank at first. The awkwardly phrased letter notifying him was hand-delivered to Comey's office in Washington by the president's bodyguard. That's pretty classy, isn't it? So was the president's explanation. The reasons kept changing. Here's the one that he gave on Thursday to NBC's Lester Holt.
He's a showboat. He's a grandstander. The FBI has been in turmoil. You know that. I know that. Everybody knows that.
No, everybody does not know that. But let's take a closer look for a moment at what Mr. Trump said about Comey, that he is a showboat and a grandstander. In psychology, that is called projection. When someone takes a characteristic or a trait that he is guilty of and blames someone else for it. Look, Comey made some mistakes as FBI director, but he has never been a showboat or a grandstander. Those terms obviously pretty accurately describe one Donald J. Trump. For 14 years, Mr. Trump gained fame as a reality TV star whose most famous words were, "You're fired." And yet, when it came to canning the head of one of the most important agencies in government, Trump couldn't bring himself to say those words face to face, looking James Comey in the eye. "You're fired." Well, it's easy enough for Trump to say on a reality TV show. It was impossible as president. Sad, as Mr. Trump might say. That's my personal perspective for this week. Hope you have a great Sunday, and all you mothers, happy Mom's Day and happy Mother's Day to you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved.
And let us know what you think. Take a look at these addresses on your screen, just some of the many ways you can reach us, and we'd love to hear from you on any topic you choose. Have a great day.